Do you think your country will still be in existence in the next 10 years? Or will you have to move to a different country in order to survive? Well, I think a lot of countries will cease to exist in the next 10 years or experience a massive decline that the world will almost forget about them, starting with these few. Now pay attention to see if your country is on this list so you can plan ahead. In an era of rapid technological advancements and globalization, many nations are facing a silent but critical crisis: population decline, whether due to aging populations, low birth rates, emigration, civil unrest, war, or economic struggles. Some countries are witnessing dramatic drops in population, and it's telling on their economic workforce and global standings. Here are the 10 fastest dying countries and some factors contributing to their decline. And just like the ancient city of Pompeii, some countries will either self-destruct or owe their demise to foreign powers. Watch this video to discover the stories behind these surprising trends. Number 3 is a shocker. Number 10, South Sudan. Born from war and threatened by war. South Sudan is the world's youngest country, gaining independence in 2011 after decades of brutal conflict with Sudan. However, this moment of joy was short-lived. Almost immediately, South Sudan plunged into a civil war between President Salva Kiir's government and forces loyal to his former deputy, Riek Machar. Ethnic violence, hunger, and displacement have left millions suffering. In 2019, Nyandeng, a 12-year-old girl, walked for days to escape conflict, arriving in a refugee camp in Uganda. Her father had been killed, her village torched. With millions displaced and the country deeply fractured along ethnic lines, it's not unthinkable that South Sudan could either fragment further or be absorbed by neighboring states and eventually cease to exist. Number 9. Hungary. In 2010, Viktor Orban became Prime Minister of Hungary for the second time after ruling the first time from 1998 to 2002. Now, whatever happened between 2002 and 2010 definitely changed the perspective of Orban towards politics and state control, because as a university student, he was part of a pro-democrat group who stood up to and fought against the Soviet Union before the fall of the Berlin Wall. But after he came into power the second time, he took measures to regulate and control the media. He also pushed for a new constitution through parliament and reworked the electoral system, overhauling the judicial system amongst many other things, creating an autocracy. All of these and more have caused a rapid decline in the economic standings of the country, and also young talents and potentials are fleeing the country, causing brain drain and creating a shrinking and aging population. Hungary's population is rapidly declining, with a fertility rate of just 2 children per woman. Prime Minister Viktor Orban has introduced aggressive policies aimed at increasing the birth rate, including tax exemptions for mothers with large families and financial support for newlyweds. Despite these efforts, Hungary's population continues to shrink. Orban has framed the country's demographic challenge as a national emergency, calling for a baby boom to offset the country's declining population. In essence, the government will pay you to give birth to children, so more children, more money. But don't you think there are better reforms that, when implemented, would naturally tackle their population decline? Well, power is more important to some people than growth. Moving forward. Number 8. Lithuania. In November 2021, Lithuania made a bold move that has not been done in the whole of Europe in the last 18 years. Many might say the decision was not completely thought through, but some might say it was. This particular move gave Lithuania the alias of Europe's David to China's Goliath, in the sense that Lithuania announced the opening of a Taiwanese representative office in its capital, Vilnius. Now, owing to the fact that China still hasn't recognized the independence of Taiwan and still considers her as part of its territory, this offended China, and they placed a diplomatic ban and a trade restriction on Lithuania. Even though the Chinese government has come out to debunk any trade boycott of Lithuania, a restriction in trade happened, and this has somehow affected the economy of Lithuania. Furthermore, Lithuania has suffered from both emigration and a low birth rate. Since joining the EU in 2004, hundreds of thousands of Lithuanians have emigrated, particularly to the UK, Germany, and Norway. The country's population has fallen from 3.7 million in 1991 to about 2.7 million today. Lithuania has implemented programs aimed at encouraging immigrants to return, but the brain drain of skilled workers and young people remains a critical issue for the country's future. Number 7. Tuvalu, also known as the Drowning Paradise. The remote Pacific nation of Tuvalu is often cited as the world's first country expected to disappear due to climate change. Comprising just 26 square kilometers of land spread across 9 low-lying islands, Tuvalu's highest point is barely 15 feet above sea level. Rising waters threaten to swallow this country whole. Residents speak of how once lush crops are now salt-ridden and how tidal flooding has become a routine. The government has already begun looking into relocation plans. The people of Tuvalu may become the world's first climate refugees. Entire generations may grow up scattered across Australia, New Zealand, or Fiji, with only stories to remind them of a homeland submerged beneath the ocean, just like the story of the Atlanteans from the sunken city of Atlantis. Come to think of it, in a few years we might just get a new superhero from Tuvalu and a new super-powered underwater civilization. Won't that be cool? Number 6. Lebanon. Lebanon's descent into chaos has been heartbreaking for a country once known as the Paris of the Middle East. Decades of corruption, sectarian divisions, and external pressures have left the nation teetering on the edge of collapse. The catastrophic Beirut port explosion in 2020 symbolized Lebanon's decay, killing over 200 people and leaving large parts of the city in ruins. One amongst many to lose their lives to the August 4th, 2020 explosions which rocked Beirut was a young 24-year-old paramedic whose name was Sahar Fares. She was one of the first responders to the fire at Beirut's port on that fateful day. What seemed like a routine emergency quickly escalated into one of the deadliest disasters in Lebanon's history. The fire at the port ignited nearly 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate that had been negligently stored in a warehouse for years. The resulting explosion leveled entire neighborhoods, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Sahar and her team arrived at the scene unaware of the deadly threat that lay inside the port's warehouses. She was doing her job, trying to help. But in mere moments, the explosion ripped through the city, killing Sahar instantly. Her fiancé, Gilbert Karan, was waiting for her at home. They were set to be married in just a few months. Instead, he received the devastating news that the love of his life was gone, taken by a disaster that could have been prevented. How sad can that be? Also, inflation has skyrocketed, the currency has collapsed, and many Lebanese are now fleeing the country in search of better opportunities abroad. A state as fragile as Lebanon risks dissolution, with potential splits along Christian, Sunni, and Shia lines. Number 5. Libya. Libya is often referred to as the failed state, but to really comprehend the circumstances that led to this declaration is a sad and controversial turn of events. Walk with me. Muammar Gaddafi came into power in 1969 after a bloodless coup which overthrew the then ruler, King Idris I. Coming to power, he established the Libyan Arab Republic and became the de facto leader of Libya. Gaddafi introduced his own political philosophy in the Green Book, which outlined his vision for direct democracy, rejecting both capitalism and communism. His ideology, referred to as the Third International Theory, promoted a system of governance based on people's committees, which he claimed was a form of direct democracy. In 1977, Gaddafi declared Libya a Jamahiriya, which translates to state of the masses. He claimed the people directly controlled the state through local councils, though in reality, he maintained dictatorial control. In the 1970s, when Libya discovered oil, Gaddafi invested richly in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, greatly improving the standard of living of many Libyans. He also pushed for a unified Africa, playing a major role in the creation of the African Union, AU. Although he was seen as a dictator, which he actually was, it is believed that Libya saw more prosperity under him than most countries could ever have. Some scholars believe that the West were threatened by his unification ideology of Africa, that they termed him a terrorist and an enemy of democracy, and in so doing, financed some rebel groups backed by NATO and eventually assassinated him. But like my history professor would always say, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Gaddafi was a great man, although flawed. He had the progress of his people at heart, and it took his death for most of the world to see that. After Gaddafi's death in 2011, Libya tumbled into a devastating, unending civil war, creating a power vacuum. Rival governments, militias, and foreign actors have carved the country into pieces. Smugglers in places like Zawiya send desperate migrants across the Mediterranean, while armed groups jockey for control of Tripoli. Libya is essentially a country in name only, with no effective central authority. If peace efforts fail, it could permanently fragment, with the East, West, and South becoming separate entities. Number 4. Iraq. Iraq, located in the heart of the Middle East, is a country with one of the richest and most complex histories in the world. Often referred to as the cradle of civilization, Iraq has been the center of great empires, religious movements, and political upheavals. Its history spans millennia, shaping the very course of human development, from ancient Mesopotamia, birthing the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian empires, followed by the Persian, Greek, and Islamic conquests, with the most famous conquest of Alexander the Great at its helm. Iraq experienced its golden era under the Abbasid Caliphate, where Baghdad became a major center of learning, science, medicine, philosophy, and culture. Scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom translated classical Greek texts, made advances in mathematics and astronomy, and preserved knowledge that would later fuel the European Renaissance. By the 9th century, the Abbasid Caliphate began to weaken due to internal strife and the rise of provincial powers. The Mongol invasion in 1258 resulted in the destruction of Baghdad, marking the end of the Abbasid Golden Era. With the Mongol invasion came the Ottoman Empire, which ruled the region for nearly 400 years. The Ottoman Empire was eventually defeated by British forces during the First World War, and a Kingdom of Iraq was created by the British, installing King Faisal I as its ruler. Iraq eventually gained its independence from the British in the year 1932, and by 1958 there was a bloody military coup and a series of events which will take a lot of time to put into this video. But eventually, Saddam Hussein gained power in 1979 and ruled Iraq with an iron fist for over 2 decades. Saddam's hunger for power eventually led to the Iraq-Iran War, which lasted for 8 years, and also the Gulf War, which eventually led to the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the capture of Saddam Hussein. With Saddam's death, the whole of Iraq dissolved into chaos, with extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS gaining control over majority of the territory of Iraq before its defeat in 2017. Few countries have suffered as much from sectarian strife as Iraq. After the U.S.-led invasion in 2003, a brutal insurgency and sectarian civil war left deep scars. The rise and fall of ISIS further splintered the country. The autonomous Kurdish region in the north has long sought independence, while Sunni and Shia militias dominate other parts of Iraq. The dream of a unified Iraq is increasingly fragile. An independent Kurdistan, a weakened central government in Baghdad, and growing Iranian influence may reshape the country's borders in the near future. Number 3. Taiwan. After the Chinese Civil War in 1949, the defeated Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek, fled to Taiwan, establishing a separate government there. While the People's Republic of China, under the Communist Party, took control of the mainland, Taiwan continued to operate as the Republic of China, maintaining the hope of one day retaking the mainland. Over time, Taiwan developed its own identity, transitioning into a democratic society with free elections, contrasting sharply with the authoritarian rule of the People's Republic of China. However, China has never relinquished its claim on Taiwan, viewing it as a breakaway province that must eventually be reunited with the mainland. For decades, the possibility of armed conflict loomed in the background, but it has become more acute in recent years as China ramps up its military presence and rhetoric against any move towards Taiwan's formal independence. In recent years, China's military has been escalating pressure on Taiwan with alarming intensity. Chinese warplanes regularly fly near or into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, testing Taiwan's defenses and rattling nerves across the island. China has rapidly modernized its navy and missile systems, positioning itself for a potential invasion of Taiwan. Taiwan's existence hangs in the balance. The island's people have built a thriving democracy, vibrant economy, and distinct cultural identity, but they face an existential threat from their powerful neighbor. Whether Taiwan will remain a de facto independent state, be integrated into China, or become the spark that ignites a larger global conflict remains one of the most pressing and uncertain questions of our time. Taiwan's future may hinge on a complex set of factors: China's willingness to use force, the resolve of the U.S. and its allies, and the determination of the Taiwanese people to protect their hard-won freedoms. As the world watches this drama unfold, it is clear that the next 10 years will be critical in determining whether Taiwan continues to stand as a beacon of democracy in East Asia or is absorbed into the shadow of a rising China. For now, Taiwan's survival story continues, but its future is anything but guaranteed. Number 2, Ukraine. Ukraine's journey as a nation has been shaped by foreign domination. For centuries, the region was ruled by various empires, including the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Ottoman Empire, and most significantly, the Russian Empire. The desire for independence was a constant theme, but it wasn't until the fall of the Russian Empire in 1917 that Ukraine briefly declared independence during the Ukrainian People's Republic, 1917 to 1921. However, this independence was short-lived, as Ukraine was soon absorbed into the Soviet Union. Under Soviet rule, Ukraine faced enormous hardships, most notably during Joseph Stalin's forced collectivization of farms, which led to the Holodomor, a man-made famine in the 1930s that killed millions of Ukrainians. Despite these tragedies, Ukrainian national identity persisted beneath the surface, waiting for another chance at independence. That opportunity finally came in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became an independent state. For the first time in modern history, Ukraine had a chance to determine its own future. But all of that hope deteriorated in 2014, when Ukraine found itself entangled in another conflict with Russia, a conflict that has already cost it Crimea and parts of the Donbass region. The full-scale invasion by Russia in 2022 only intensified the existential threat. In cities like Mariupol, civilians endured siege-like conditions as their homes were bombed, and families fled westward, seeking refuge in Europe. Despite the bravery of its people and international support, Ukraine's future remains uncertain. Continued Russian aggression could lead to further territorial loss or even a full partition of the country. If you've watched this far, that means you must be getting valuable information from this video, and for that, I thank you for sticking around and allowing me to broaden your perspective beyond continental lines. Now, can you take a wild guess as to what the last country might be? You might have an idea, and you might just be right or wrong, but for the last country, we have North Korea. While many people might know about the country called North Korea, not many people knows about how it came into existence and how the Kim dynasty became its rulers. North Korea's history begins after the end of World War II in 1945, when Korea, previously occupied by Japan, was divided at the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union controlled the northern half, and the United States controlled the south. In 1948, two separate states were established: North Korea in the north, led by Kim Il-sung, and South Korea in the south. Tensions between the two Koreas erupted into the Korean War when North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded the South. The war ended in an armistice in 1953, but no formal peace treaty was signed, leaving the two Koreas technically still at war. Kim Il-sung established a brutal dictatorship and cult of personality in North Korea, cementing his family's rule over the nation. Upon his death in 1994, his son Kim Jong-il took over, and in 2011, his grandson, Kim Jong-un, became the third leader of the Kim dynasty. Each leader has maintained strict control over the country through repression, propaganda, and a massive military presence. North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons has defined its relationship with the world in recent decades. Despite international sanctions, North Korea developed nuclear capabilities under Kim Jong-il and conducted its first successful nuclear test in 2006. Kim Jong-un has further advanced these programs, making North Korea a nuclear power, though its economy continues to struggle under the weight of sanctions. North Korea, under the dictatorial rule of the Kim family, has remained one of the world's most isolated countries. Despite decades of repression, famine, and sanctions, the regime has held on. However, the cracks are starting to show. Stories of underground resistance, defections, and black market trade tell of a population that's losing faith in the regime. Many experts believe that if Kim Jong-un's grip on power weakens, North Korea could implode. In that scenario, the country could reunify with South Korea or descend into chaos, ceasing to exist as an independent entity.